easier. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me? I can hear myself, so that's a yes. If there's anybody else outside, get them in. Well, good morning. My name is Sean Wine. I'm with Clean Energy, and I am the moderator for this panel, and glad to be here today. This is a very significant, I think, panel discussion. We have a lot of expertise sitting up here, spread across various segments of the natural gas vehicle market. And what we consistently talk about in the RNG industry, in the biogas space, is what is the future for natural gas transportation. We know that the best and highest use for using biogas systems and RNG is in transportation. It really is the key to decarbonizing the transportation markets broadly, whether it's in vocational vehicles, buses, trucks, airports. And it's been a real good success story so far, where RNG has penetrated almost 80% of the NGV market. So I think this is a testament to the industry and to all of you in this room that are participants in the biogas industries, that we have been able to do what we've been able to accomplish with transportation fleets. So today we're going to get kicked off and talk with Marty from Waste Management, WM. He's a legend in the space, been doing natural gas vehicles for decades, and he'll talk about his experiences with WM. It's no secret, we know that WM is closing the loop for their operations, both from a landfill development all the way to the fleet. We'll talk with Dan Gage, he's the president of the Transport Project, formerly the NGVA, which represents the natural gas vehicle market. We have Jared from Paper Transport, which is one of the, I would say, one of the biggest dedicated carriers in this market for Class 8 tractor trailers, working with the shippers moving goods. And then we have Patrick from Cummins, who will talk about some of the Cummins product technology that's out there and what the future holds. So with that, we're going to start. The format of this is each presenter is going to show a couple slides, and I'll provide some Q&A throughout that process. So with that, Marty, you're up first.
Make sure the mic's close enough. Good morning. Thank you. Just set the stage for conversation and questions. We've been doing this for literally over 20 years, running RNG and CNG, LNG, all of the gaseous fuels. A couple of the reasons why we do it: clean air for our customers, healthier for our people, lower maintenance cost, and it's the lowest cost fuel. Next, Sean. So here's where we're headed on the RNG production side. 6 plants at the end of 22, headed to 21 plants by 25. We have a stated goal that by end of 25, early 26, that every gallon of fuel that we burn in the fleet, we will have produced from one of our landfills. Closed loop slide. Everybody understands how this works. Produce the gas, burn it at the end. Keep going. So here's the main slide. As we sit here today, we're at a little over 12,000 natural gas vehicles running. We're projecting to be over 13,000 by the end of 24. We've got 199 stations that we have built, own, and operate, with 28 of those being open for retail. We burned over 90 million DGE last year in fuel, and we've invested over $4 billion in that. And as you see, there's future investment moving forward with producing RNG plants. Our plan long term is to expand to as much of the fleet as we possibly can. I'd say 90% plus. We're doing lots of things around that with mobile fueling, hub and spoke, dedicated stations, as you've seen before, and working our way through this. And the goal, again, is to be about 95% of the fleet, or approximately 15,000 trucks running down the road burning RNG. So that's our long-term plan.
Okay. Marty, I've got a couple questions for you.
Yes.
So obviously waste has been in this for a long time. The statistics speak for themselves. But can you speak to, because you've been doing this for so long, what are some of the biggest challenges and hurdles that you guys have had to overcome? You know, there's a lot of discussion in the market with new operators that are looking at doing natural gas vehicles. What kind of guidance could you give them in terms of this is what you need to plan for? This is the challenges that you've got to get your company or your operators or your maintenance folks set up with to ensure a successful program?
Sure. First on the list would be, this isn't a technology, my humble opinion, that you would dabble in. You got to push all your chips to the middle of the table and go all in. And that's exactly what we did back in the late 2000s. We put all of our chips in. And what I mean by that is then you have to build your infrastructure with your stations, and more importantly, winning over your drivers, making them understand what they're driving, that it's absolutely safe. Same thing with your technicians, training your technicians, making them understand that it's safe, putting the programs in place so all of the technology that you're taking care of when you make a major shift like that, that every detail is thought about, training, safety first and foremost. It's just, you have to change the way you do business. And this is the mainstay of what we do with business today, is this is how we do business. So that would be my first and foremost advice.
Okay, so a lot of fleet transformation, buy-in from all levels in order to do this. I think that's an important step that every operator needs to follow. But when you look at the future, right? So you've got your program with natural gas, you've built it out, you've done all your shops, you've got the buy-in across the various levels in the organization. What does the future look like with different technologies, right? Can you take the same mindset and try other technologies? We know that WM is always testing new product, new technologies. What does that look like for you guys?
And again, the first thing I want to state there is we're technology agnostic. We will do whatever is good for our customers, our employees, and our stockholders. And we're testing all technologies, whether it's hydrogen, battery electric, hybrid, obviously natural gas is what we do every day, and we're trying all of those. But where we are with those, my humble opinion right now, is where we were in 2001 with natural gas. It wasn't always perfect. We knew that, and we invested millions of dollars, broke a lot of eggs along the way, and just had to, because we were forced regulatory wise, we had to do it. We didn't have any choice, and that the epicenter of that is Southern California, and we did that exact same thing. We're doing the exact same thing with the new technologies, but again, I think we've got quite a ways to go to get to where everything is what I'll call, from a safety standpoint, that all the employees that come in contact with it are educated, that it's commercially viable. That's the biggest one. And then, there's lots of consequences. And the first one that I would bring up is weight. Battery electric, as an example, is very, very heavy. And, anybody that runs a trucking organization typically lives and dies by net payload. So all of that is extremely important.
Okay. I'll come back to you. I've got a couple other follow-ups, but let's go to Patrick. So Patrick with Cummins, we just heard from Marty talk about technology and what you need to do from a technology standpoint to get that adopted within your organization. Patrick, talk to us a little bit about what Cummins is doing.
Right. So this slide, it talks about our X15N, which is the new platform that we're releasing this year. It's the first big bore natural gas engine we've ever done. And to put that in perspective, the largest engine we had in this space, it was 12 liters. And so this opens up a lot of the new markets for us. This engine already meets the 24/27 CARB omnibus and NOx rules, so way ahead of the diesel platforms. It's a compact 15-liter, so it fits in the same space as most 12 and 13-liter diesel engines, which is really important for fleets and for OEMs. It's 500 pounds lighter than our diesel platform, the 15-liter. So that means you can add the tanks and so forth, all the ancillary natural gas equipment, and you really don't have a net increase in weight of the vehicle, so that's important. 10% fuel efficiency improvement over the 12-liter. It's natural gas just has less energy in it, so it's going to always be less efficient than a diesel engine in over-the-road applications, but we're claiming back some of that fuel efficiency loss that we had with the earlier product. Up to 500 horsepower, 1850 pound-feet of torque. And for those who don't know or are not in transportation business, that means a lot, because the 12-liter is only 400, 1450. So we're gaining back a lot of power, much more diesel-like in the performance. Compact three-way catalyst, so it doesn't have the advanced after-treatment systems that diesel engines have. Industry-leading transmission options, Endurant 12-speed automated manual and Allison transmission. And I think one of the most important things is working with the renewable natural gas providers really makes this work for us. It's, on a total cost of ownership, it can be challenging to match up with diesel, although it's getting easier. RNG and carbon sustainability and ESG is what really makes this platform viable.
Patrick, before I go to the next slide, let me ask a question. So you mentioned this is the first time you've had a big bore engine like this before. What's the market that you're trying to tackle with this? How big is that? So it's kind of put it in perspective. How many trucks are sold? What kind of market share are you guys trying to penetrate here?
Yeah, so with the 12-liter platform, we were about 1% market share. So put that in perspective, Class A truck markets between 250 and 300,000 units a year. So we were, 2,500, 3,000 or 4,000 units a year. Not exactly earth-shattering performance. This opens up the market for us into the sleeper trucks, long haul, the 2/3 of the business that we didn't have any chance to get with the 12-liter. So 12-liter is basically day cabs, drayage, regional haul type applications. This opens it up completely. Our goal really is to get to 10% market share by 2030. Having conversations earlier with Marty, he thinks it can grow beyond that. It possibly could. Knock wood, with the field tests that we're doing right now, going excellent. Drivers like it. Fuel efficiency is good. Performance is really good. So knock wood, we're doing really well with it.
So if you said, just so I make sure I heard right, because I think it's important for the room, on a conservative basis, 200,000 trucks ordered, replaced in this market share, the kind of this size of class truck a year.
Yeah.
So if you got 10% of that.
Yeah, we're thinking, 25 to 30,000 units a year with this mark, and it'll be displacing diesel engines, ours and others, and we think that's a legitimate number going
So
forward.
by 2030, I mean, in hearing you said 25%, 10%, right? I mean, that's a sizable amount of RNG load that would be required to service that. I mean, you're talking 250 million gallons of RNG every year incrementally being added into the program.
Exactly right. Yep.
Okay. I think that's a pretty positive sign that we should support Cummins' efforts in this as best we can, right?
Yes, exactly.
So here you go. Next slide.
So this is more for trucking people, but basically those ratings on the far left they mirror our diesel platform. So from 400 horsepower to 1450, all the way up to 500, 1850. So this is really important because the 12-liter it didn't quite have enough oomph to get into most applications. This does. And so most over-the-road fleets are running 450, 475, 16, 17, 1850 pound-feet of torque. So this gets us right in the ballpark. And so there really is no excuse anymore for fleets to say, well, this doesn't have the performance I need, or the drivers won't like it. That's off the table now. This really does work well. So, and this is sort of an overlay of diesel versus natural gas torque curves. It's kind of very engineering-esque, but basically the torque curve is flat from idle all the way out to, I think it's 1,500 RPMs. And so they basically lay over the top of each other. So it sort of reiterates the fact that this thing has the performance that fleets will need going forward. And this is our lineup. So so there are 4 major OEMs. There's Daimler Truck, there's Navistar, Volvo, and then there's PACCAR. We have this year, Peterbilt and Kenworth are the 2 divisions under PACCAR. And we have availability there, so you could get pricing if you wanted. And I think production starts in this summer, August, I think. And then next year, Freightliner is going to put this in production in their Cascadia. So these are the 2 largest OEMs out there. And so if we're going to be with any of the 2 of the 4, these are the 2 we want to be with. So.
Okay, well, I'll come back to you with some Q&A. I got some follow-up for Patrick. But So your market that this engine would be perfect for sounds like would be paper transport's business. So, Jared, why don't you just give us a little overview of paper transport and why you find using our biogas in your CNG vehicles is important.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me today. A little bit about paper transport real quickly. So we're headquartered in Green Bay, Wisconsin. We run about 800 trucks. Just under 10% of those trucks are powered by natural gas. We've been using natural gas trucks now for over a decade. Unlike waste management, we could not go all in large part because of how we have to run our fleets. So we are a Class 8 fleet, 53-foot van trailers for the most part, full truckload. And 90% of the freight we move is dedicated to one particular shipper. So think of an out and back type model, but still a lot of those fleets, the drivers may not get home until the weekend, every other week or every weekend. So the fleets are running out in a one-way format. And while the natural gas fueling infrastructure is much better than it was 10 years ago, it still isn't quite where you need to be to count on always having a fueling station. And so what it really starts and ends with is the shipper, right? They're at the top of the collaboration wheel, if you will. And what we need, because the engine isn't the same price as a diesel engine, and it does have a lot more investment in it. And while the fuel is lower from a cost perspective, we do need to pass on that cost to shippers. So one of the things that we will do is work with shippers to award us a dedicated contract. So we can count on the fact that that truck will be deployed in that manner for 3, 4, or 5 years, depending upon the length of the agreement. And so that does require shippers to buy into the alternative fuel in order for us to deploy the tractor. We do have about 10% of our business that runs in a one-way format in the Midwest, and we have deployed natural gas trucks both in the one-way format and also from an intermodal drayage. So Paper Transport, or PTI, is a top 20 intermodal marketing company. So we'll go to shippers and we'll basically, where they can award us an agreement longer than a year, we'll deploy natural gas powered trucks to do a dray move that might be, say, 200 miles, length of haul one way. And we'll do 2 of those a day and then combine the sustainability benefits of shipping on the train with that of a natural gas powered truck. So we've been at this, and I know Sean's got a few questions, and I'll maybe turn it over to you, but we're very comfortable with the OEMs in this space, the engine. Cummins does a great job. We're comfortable with the fuel providers. I appreciate the fact that we're getting more and more from a supply perspective, but many of your companies are shippers out there, and we do need more of a commitment from the shipping community if you move full truckloads, and especially if they have a dedicated fleet, to look at alternative fuels and determine if it works for that particular shipper. So maybe I'll turn it over to you, Sean, and we'll.
Well, so on that, I mean, the shipping community, what's the biggest challenge that you see, or the hurdle to getting them to buy in? Is it education? Is it lack of information? Is it, having to get to the right people and the right levels? Speak to that, because I think that's the important thing that you're saying right here, is that you have a solution, you have an opportunity, but you need somebody to buy into that opportunity and that solution, and that's your customer. So what can this industry do to help with that?
Yeah, from a shipping community, many times they'll award their freight for 1 year or maybe less. Some might even go transactional. So if you're a transportation provider and you want to deploy an asset, you're going to deploy an asset that can run anywhere if the freight flows change every year. So first thing is we look for shippers and the shipping community award longer term agreements where you can count on that particular asset running on that lane. We will look for shippers that traditionally have dedicated fleets. If those dedicated fleets also overlap with existing fueling infrastructure, that's kind of a, obviously a bingo where we could potentially deploy the trucks, already have fuel, and, work with the shippers to award the contract for a longer period of time. The other thing I think shippers probably could embrace is they don't need to go from, where they're at today to zero immediately, right? That isn't a requirement. We can start by getting some emission reductions and moving forward with, natural gas, renewable natural gas, which can get us to zero or near zero, right? But I think many of them have been, looking at the other BEVs or other fuels, but I believe shippers need to improve all the fuels. And I think, as Marty mentioned earlier, you have to have a strategy overall. And one of the challenges, I think, is the shippers have sustainability leadership now, and the sustainability budget gets separated from the transportation budget. And so the transportation leader doesn't want to spend more, but they have to look at it as one total cost of ownership.
So when you say shippers, do you have anybody that you could reference as like an example for the room here? Because that could be the way I'm thinking about it. It could be someone like a Walmart or a Target or a Unilever or a Kroger or someone like that. Do you have a case study or an example that you could share about something that was successful and how you got them over the hurdle?
Sure. I think, and this is a household name, and Unilever has been very vocal about their sustainability goals. And they're an example of a shipper that does have a lot of density in and out of a location where we have deployed natural gas trucks to support them. And they're, mentioned their big competitor, Procter & Gamble, has embraced the intermodal components of the business and deploying natural gas trucks on drays. And then there's, other brand names out there that we don't do a lot of business with. I think PepsiCo is a good one. They just had a sustainability summit yesterday afternoon that I attended virtually, and they've embraced all the fuels as well. So I think you do see a lot of shippers behaving the way that you would want. IKEA is another one that we work with, and I could continue to name them off. But there are a number of shippers that are doing the right thing and awarding the freight for many years so we can deploy the assets.
Do they have a perspective on natural gas broadly versus RNG being used? Do you see that still being an adoption opportunity, just using natural gas trucks, or do you see that they don't want to even focus on that?
It's a good question. I think they do need to understand how to leverage the RNG benefits, and I think how to book the benefits of the RNG. I think it's not always easy to be able to take credit for it. And we work with a number of partners, including Clean Energy, that have done a nice job educating shippers on how to make sure that they're taking advantage of the fact that they have a carrier utilizing renewable natural gas. So I think they're aware of it. They just don't understand exactly how to take advantage of it once they deploy that approach.
Okay, we'll come back to it. So Dan Gage has been in this space a long time. So Dan, I want you to talk about the natural gas industry broadly and kind of your view and the outlook. We're going to get into some policy discussions, talk about some regulations, and really at some point I'll bring it back to the group to talk about how do we thread the needle? How do we make this successful? So Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I'm here representing the Transport Project. We're a 501c6, just like American Biogas Council. We work closely with Patrick and Heather in Washington, but we represent the end user. And the unique part about our organization is we represent fleets like WM, Paper Transport. We represent PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, UPS. So if they're large national fleets, running freight with natural gas, we typically have them as members. We represent gas utilities, we represent gas producers, we represent fuelers like Clean Energy, and also companies like Cummins and OEM. So everyone sort of in that space is under our umbrella. I've been in this particular job for 6.5 years now. And when I started, renewable natural gas was in the teens in terms of motor fuel dispensed nationally. Last year, in 2023, that was 79%. So very, very quickly, when you're talking about natural gas trucking or natural gas freighting, It's renewable natural gas freighting for a couple good reasons, right? Early on, I think companies like WM transitioned to natural gas for the criteria pollutant benefits and for cost benefits, right? Natural gas tends to come in a little bit cheaper than diesel. There's an incremental cost on the vehicle up front, but if you're running vehicles and you're running that fleet over a period of time, as Jared was talking about, you can get that return on that investment. These fleets are running now with renewable natural gas, so that adds in a whole new level of greenhouse gas emissions. When we think, and we're going to talk, I think, a little bit about emissions regulations, there's two levels of regulation, right? There's criteria pollutants, so NOx and SOx and particulate matter, and then there's greenhouse gas, carbon. Natural gas has always run, whether it is conventional natural gas or renewable natural gas, right? It's methane. It's not a complex hydrocarbon, so it runs very clean, similar to, I know the engineers get mad at me when I use this analogy, but it's like 130 octane. So if you think about when you're fueling up your car at 87 or 93, natural gas traditionally runs about 130. So it's a very clean burning fuel. You don't need all the after treatment. That was is in itself is a huge accomplishment. We like to say we're zero emission equivalent. Current natural gas engines are about 90% cleaner than existing federal NOx standards. But when you throw in now, right, Sean, this influx of RNG, now you're getting carbon benefits, greenhouse gas benefits. And if we look at states with LCFS programs, they're tracking every pathway, right, or every input into the system. Last year in California, that average, that bio-CNG average of motor fuel dispensed at a pump was at negative 126. So when you pull into the sustainability folks and you say to them as a shipper, hey, we are running, say, in California, your loads in state with RNG, and the average mix is negative 126, that then allows them, right, to hit that net zero average. And that's why fleets like UPS and Amazon or WM with very, very aggressive carbon reduction goals can achieve it today, not waiting for electric or hydrogen fuel cell technology to become more advanced and mature and deployable and scalable, but they can achieve it today just simply by running a natural gas Cummins engine, or we have Chuck Koppas here with American Power Group. They have a dual fuel product, but you can achieve those carbon reduction numbers today running natural gas.
So Dan, you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about emissions. What are some of the looming regulations that are coming in the near term or potentially long term that's going to be driving some of the discussion on what to use in the transportation markets?
And they're here today, right? So you have CARB, California Air Resources Board, and those states that are adopting some of these CARB regulations. And then you have federal EPA. And again, two sets of regs, right? Some are clean air regs, some are carbon regs. A looming one on the federal side is a 2027 EPA clean trucks rule, right? So all trucks now, eventually in 2027, all heavy-duty engines will have to meet a 0.035 standard for NOx. Current natural gas is about 0.02. Marty's trucks, when they run in the road in real world, are at 0.01. So we're in essence achieving that today. So if you're running natural gas, you can check that box because you'll get there. On the carbon side, it's a little bit trickier. And that's because of the way rules and regs are treating natural gas compared to electricity. And it's a little finger on the scale, right? It's an agenda from purists, environmental purists that say it's got to be all electric or nothing. And so, part of my mission, our mission here, is to encourage you all to work with us to help in this pushback. The way multipliers, and we could get into a lot of really difficult details, but the way those multipliers are today is it does put electric at an advantage. There is a looming phase 3 omnibus rule that's federally. It does match up with rules that CARB already has put into play that'll start in 2027, and then they get more aggressive 27, 28, 29, 30, all the way into the low 30s. That is going to require greater percentages of vehicles to be electric. You can achieve some of that with a lot of credits today, paper credits, with natural gas, but that's probably the biggest looming regulation is the EPA Phase 3 greenhouse gas rule that we are pushing back against. It was just finalized a few months ago, late 2020, what are we, 24? So it's late 2023. The original proposed rule was much worse. We worked very closely with a lot of our partners to have EPA understand the benefits and be able to calculate and give RNG the credits that's due because you're displacing, right, all of that carbon, and give us credit for those negative CI scores. And that's our challenge. The rulemaking did improve that. There's a lot of message of it, but we are, as a motor fuel, we are judged, we are only judged by tailpipe, right? By tank to what's used on the truck, not well to wheel. And that's what we need to have a whole life cycle emissions as part of this evaluation process moving forward. And I think we're going to get there, but it's painful.
Well, that's an important topic. So, there's discussions. I was on a panel yesterday. There's discussions of a national low carbon fuel standard, trying to push forth with that as a complement to the renewable fuel standard that generates all the RINs for the industry. But how do we incorporate that? What's the best way to tackle that to make sure that life cycle emissions are part of the decision making? Is that a work with EPA? Is that a DOE? What does that look like?
I think that, it's EPA and it's definitely CARB. I think there's general acknowledgement from those policymakers and regulators that that's long-term, it's justifiable and that it should be done. The problem is if you do it and you do it correctly and you give full credit to RNG in this space, in this motor fuel space, then it hurts the agenda that everything should be electrified now. So they have been reticent publicly, I think, to acknowledge that and to advance some goals. We see early small wins, right? They're small wins, but it doesn't meet that long-term objective. But I think there's a growing acknowledgement that there are some very, very difficult and likely applications where electric will never work. And so what's the next best thing? And so, we hear an awful lot that if you promote, folks probably in this room, you're promoting RNG, you're just allowing, you're just giving cover for fossil to continue fossil. And we've got to break that sort of mentality. And I think we're getting there quietly, privately, but it's not evidence in regulations that continue to come out. Now, California has, EPA has its set of regulations. California has its own when it comes to greenhouse gas, but it has advanced clean truck, and then there's advanced clean fleet. So there's sales mandates, and now there are purchase mandates. But as I said, we're seeing early wins. The Section 177 states that have adopted a lot of CARB rules. Last year, Maine failed to adopt the truck rules after it was almost prepared to do so. North Carolina, the governor and his administration started to advance the rules. The legislature said no way and passed a rule that rejected it. So California rejected heavy-duty CARB rules. And we also saw that in Connecticut, where the rules failed by a Democratic-led state house and a Democratic governor, where they decided to not pass those rules because of application issues, because of readiness, because of scalability. So we are seeing some wins, but it is running into the wind. And there are days where it makes your hair hurt. You can tell how much from Marty. But I think we're getting there. And when I started, Sean, the folks who were talking about this were the bloggers in a basement with tinfoil hats on. You are seeing stories about the challenges that fleets are having in mainstream media, however you want to phrase it, fake news or whatever. But Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times are doing Sunday enterprise stories on this challenge and the fact that electrification is not going to get there for all heavy duty applications. So what are other alternatives? And RNG is the next best thing because you can achieve carbon negative today with RNG.
All right, well, let me ask, let's flip this to Patrick real quick. So Patrick, obviously the beauty of biogas is that we can go to all sorts of end use markets. So there's a lot of discussion about the ERIN, which is a light duty application play ultimately, at least today, because there's a lot of EVs on the consumer vehicle side. But when we think about these regs and what's coming that Dan just referenced, what's Cummins' perspective on that? What's your engagement on it? Because it's great that you might have a regulation, and I think California, to echo kind of what Dan said, California's feeling the crunch a little bit that they've got the regulations on the books, but the scale and of the technology from a commercial viability standpoint is not there. So what's Cummins doing on this in terms of, I guess you could say, threading the needle with the regulators to bring awareness about product availability? I mean, you guys obviously have zero emission as kind of a goal of the corporation, but you're also, you're a public company, you have shareholders, and you also have customers. And so you're going to respond to what the customer needs are. And if there's not the electric vehicle, heavy duty applications available today at scale, what's the answer here? How do we get the regulators to understand the economy of the market from what's really viable versus what's ideologically what you want to do?
Well, we're fortunate enough that we have the bandwidth to go all in on all technologies, right? So this new engine, the 15-liter, actually comes in 3 flavors. So there's the natural gas being launched this year, diesel in 26, and then hydrogen in 2028. And we're doing the same with smaller engines, a 10-liter and so forth. So we're basically out there educating our customer base on all the things that all the different fuels can do, the pros and cons and so forth. And natural gas is obviously at the top of the list right now. We also have a zero tailpipe division called Accelera, where we're doing battery electric and fuel cell and electrolyzers. So Cummins is all in on all the technologies. We're trying not to sway. We're trying to make our customers understand what they can and can't do today, right? And trying to do the best thing they can do for themselves and us today. But be ready for the future as well. And we get a lot of customers that want to talk about hydrogen. We go in, we talk about the pros and cons, and all of a sudden the conversation steers itself back to natural gas, because natural gas is basically a turnkey solution today that we can work with them on. And
so what, on the hydrogen and electric front, what's the outlook? I mean, how are things in that market for you guys? I mean, from a product standpoint, is it kind of like baby steps, or in the very infancy of it, or what's that look like?
Yeah, I mean, baby steps from a hydrogen and internal combustion engine perspective. We're doing field tests right now. From like fuel cells, we've got some field tests with the hydrogen producers, but it's field tested, it's basic stuff. It's a science experiment at this point. We have some EV technology that's in production right now for school bus and some transit. It hasn't really reached the pedals on over the road. I think anybody's really gotten there where it would replace a diesel engine in most applications. It's short haul, too heavy, too expensive, too hard to charge. I mean, all the things that we all know about, it's just not ready for prime time. So.
Okay. Well, let me bring it to Marty. So Marty, you guys have been all in on natural gas infrastructure. If there was, and you guys do test out all these different products, and I know you said it is in its infancy today. What would you guys have to do differently if you were to convert and start using some of these technologies? I mean, you spent, I'm assuming, millions of dollars on infrastructure for your guys' own operations. What would that change look like if you were to move in a different direction?
It depends on if you're at a current natural gas site, at a current diesel site, or a greenfield site. I mean, obviously, it's much easier at greenfield to do that stuff. You have to be careful when you're mixing technologies. You have codes and standards and setbacks and things like that you have to worry about if you start mixing electrical and natural gas, obviously. And so you just have to be careful around that. But we've got to work our way back, to what Patrick said. There has to be commercial viability in this, and it has to be able to do the work. And that's where we're struggling. I mean, like Patrick said, we're in the alpha truck scenario. We're doing grant trucks. You can't afford to do it on a one-on-one basis with what we normally do every single day, because so it has to be subsidized, and that's probably the biggest thing. And then as far as BEV is the infrastructure itself, which has been alluded to, is there's places where you can't get it, and you won't get it for, we've heard 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and in some places never. So it's there's a lot of challenges with it, and again, we'll keep working it. But I think what it boils down to is what everybody has said in this panel: what's ready right now, what works today.
So, Patrick, back to you, and then I'll move to the next set of questions. But from Cummins is a global leader, selling engines all over the world. Are you selling electric or hydrogen engines in international community? And is there a big difference in those markets versus what's in the U.S.?
Yeah, so we have a large presence in China. We're actually this natural gas engine's in production for a few years, and we have tens of thousands of them in operation. We have some fuel cell business over there in transit. Quite a substantial. Customers are taking it. EV right now in the United States, it's school bus and transit bus. It's pretty limited by range and all the technology hurdles that we have. So we have operations. A lot of it is in China. They're really pushing hard on carbon reduction over there. And I don't know the numbers on hydrogen, but we're further ahead over there than we are here. We started the process there earlier because we had to, and so we're adopting the technology, bringing it over here, and scaling it up for the United States, North America.
So, Jared, you were hitting on something that I think is important for all of us, and it's the sustainability aspect of this. And I don't want to say it's a sales pitch to the shippers, but our industry in the biogas space is complex, right? It's very complicated from an RFS perspective. It's complicated from a low carbon fuel standard perspective, regardless of the state. There's a lot of complexity from a compliance standpoint. What's the big complexity, and how do we, on the sustainability side, and how do we get more involvement to message that out there to the shipping community? Because I think just like cities and municipalities that might be working with WM on, within their franchise, I don't think in many cases understand the benefits that the truck driving down the street is providing from a NOx or a carbon standpoint to the community. How can we get the messaging from a sustainability standpoint out to the shipping community? Because I think that's a key component to us being able to unlock more RNG development as well as more natural gas transportation volumes.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it takes all the industry partners that you saw on the slide that I had up, and I think Dan calling out the transport project groups next week is an example. I'll be out in Las Vegas at the ACT conference, and it's encouraging to see more and more shippers attend events like that. So I think this event is obviously more on the supply side, but some of these events really attack the end users. And I think encouraging shippers to engage at those events, attend those events, and then obviously from our perspective at Paper Transport, we are doing everything we can to get out in front of the shippers, and we are encouraged to see more and more of the procurement or transportation procurement team members engage their sustainability team members. So I think that's one action we can take as well, is ensuring that the stakeholders within the shippers are talking to each other. Sometimes they're very large companies and they're not on the same page, and I think we do need that. And then I think it's important for us to probably put more effort in how to quantify the benefits of going to RNG and make sure that the shipping community understands how they can take credit for using that as a fuel. We've got one particular ship right now. They have a carrier that's using a BEV truck. They have to take product off of every single load. That's not a good thing for a shipper. That just means they have to ship more loads. And obviously that's not good for the environment either, and it's higher cost. In addition to that, the truck can only do 2 of the 10 lanes because of the range issues. So we're trying to encourage them to go down the RNG path, and one of their hangups is how do I take credit for it? So I think that's probably the biggest space, is how do we connect the dots for them to see that RNG can get them to zero or below zero in certain states, and depending upon how you utilize the credits. So I think that's a few ideas, but I do think word of mouth helps a great deal.
Absolutely. Dan, go ahead.
I wanted to add, I want to add something based on what these guys have been sharing. People ask me about how are you bullish, and why do we need you all, right? Why do we need the production folks? Why should they focus on transportation? I think we're at this precipice, even though we've got this regulatory statutes that are looming, but I think we're as an industry at a really big, important point. We've got technology that is, third, fourth, fifth generation. They've figured it out. You've got a network of suppliers and fuelers nationwide. Yes, we need more, on open highway stations. We've got fleets that have figured out the secret sauce, right? We've got this new 15-liter engine. We've got ample supply of RNG, and I know that 79% figure might like a little daunting, but I think right now we're using in the transportation space about 75 trillion BTUs a year. If Patrick and Cummins are successful with their sales, that could be upwards of 500 trillion within the next 5-10 years. So there is market opportunity. And when I look at regulations and we look at policymakers, let's just assume for a minute that Marty can get the electric product that he needs, and it's scalable, or an electric truck that gets the range that you need with the payload that you need. Let's now think about the fuel and the recharging. And that's still a huge challenge that is not going to change in the next 10 years. You have electric utilities that are going to be required to bring into a depot for, say, 30 Class 8 trucks, the same amount of megawatts that the Empire State Building uses on a business day. That's a huge challenge. So it's about 9 megawatts. Yeah, 9 megawatts of power for a 35 Class 8 fleet, right? So 35 Class 8 trucks.
So if Jared had to station at 35 trucks is what you're talking about.
He would need, for charging those vehicles, he would need the same amount of power at that one facility that the Empire State Building uses in a day, about 9 megawatts. But that's just your facility, right? That's not the FedEx facility across the street or the UPS or all these other electric needs. So we are always going to need a transportation fuel separate from electric in this nation. And RNG is the cleanest, right? Least carbon intensive, it's carbon negative intensity, right? Fuel. There's going to be an opportunity for that. And it's, when does this house of cards sort of fall? But I think we're almost at that point where folks are recognizing that. But we need more people in the course.
All right, so then I'm going to just add on to that. So this is a question to all of you guys. What do we need to do? I mean, if what you're saying is 9 megawatts, I mean, you've got all the benefits you're saying. Why is it so? And I kind of know the answer, but why is it so hard to get everybody to buy into this and understand that this is a situation today, at least on the zero emission vehicles? Why you can't get people to understand the problems with it? Not problems, but just the major challenges that the United States would have to undertake to make that accomplished.
And I'll add one thing, because it's probably a little pessimistic, but form follows financing in life, right?
Yep.
Cash is king. And right now there are ample grants. There's money available. But at some point that runs out, that goes away. And I think we're very close to getting there, regardless of what happens in November with the election, both the White House and Congress. There's just not enough money to make it all work. When I started, when I started at NGVA, or now Transport Project, we talked a lot about cost effectiveness. No one cared. Policymakers didn't care because money was free. That's why you're seeing all this push for electric school buses. But if you just took those resources, that $5 billion, right, and put it into RNG or propane, even school buses, you could get 3 times the number of clean school buses on the road. But no one cares about that. They will, because next year is going to be a big year talking about financing, talking about funding, talking about federal outlays and tax code. It's all coming to this sort of, this big, it's an Armageddon, right? It's a perfect storm. And I think people are going to start talking about cost and availability. And I think
so
that will influence these folks. It will influence, shippers.
So let's talk cost, right? So you've made the case, and I think it's accurate, about the expenses on the zero emission technology at this point to actually roll out a big program. What is the total cost of ownership from a natural gas standpoint? Like, is it more cost effective? I mean, at the end of the day, someone's got to pay, right? So when you look at Class 8 tractors for Jared, or you look at WM, can you speak to the total cost of ownership and what you're seeing out there? I mean, taking government subsidies and everything off the table, is it still cost effective to operate a natural gas fleet in our market?
From our standpoint, yeah, I mean, my first slide laid that out. I mean, it's absolutely cost effective, and that's the difference. Is our baseline is natural gas or RNG. Our baseline isn't currently diesel, because we have more natural gas trucks than we have diesel trucks left. So, and again, I can only speak for my duty cycle, but our duty cycle with the emissions systems that are on board, we learned this back in the early 2000s with CARB, when they forced us to put DPFs and DOCs on diesel engines, and what would happen in our duty cycle. It was not good. The maintenance costs skyrocketed. And that's the difference between the two. That's when we knew, when 07 and 010 came into play, we already knew what was going to happen. So yeah, it's cost effective.
So I guess, does anybody know what the diesel price will be 1 year from now? I think what we try to get shippers to understand is, how would you like some budget certainty in not only fuel costs, but your overall transportation spend? And I think the challenge is getting them to think past just this year. And unfortunately, a lot of procurement managers are held accountable to the annual budget. And so what we need to do is continue to get higher up within their organization, in some cases the C-suite likely, to get them to look past a year, look at 3 to 5 years. And if diesel prices are somewhere north of $4 a gallon at the, for us to pay for, which it's not necessarily today in many states, but it is in others, this is cost effective. The difference in the fuel cost over just say a 4-year period would pay for the incremental cost of the truck driven by that. It's not just the engine, but the tanks are more costly as well. So to defend Cummins here, that the tanks themselves are more costly as well. But you can get the payback. You just need the shippers to sign up for a longer period of time and take into account that they don't know where diesel surcharge is going to be a year from now, 2 years from now. But if you just average it out, and maybe it comes out a little more costly if diesel prices stay low. But at the same time, you have to take into account and show value in the carbon offset. And I think some countries, I know Canada is an example, they have a carbon tax. I don't want any more taxes, but that would certainly help more shippers embrace alternative fuels. I echo the statistics. I worked for a different company in Green Bay in the trucking industry for a long time, and they, through the funding that California provided, they were able to build charging infrastructure at one of their facilities for around 92 trucks. That infrastructure can power a city of 100,000 people. At that, and it's like the Empire State, that's just 90 trucks. We have a source today, and I'll just echo your comments. One of the things that we need to make sure shippers don't, because there are some publications that have suggested that the supply of RNG could be a concern. And I think we need to continue to see things like I saw earlier today around clean energy, 9 more projects, I believe is what I read. It might be more than that. We need to make sure the shipping community knows that there is no concern on supply from an RNG perspective. So the more we can do that, the better.
One of the things you posed was, what can this room do? We have and Jared just reminded me of this. We have our number one legislative priority in Washington is to implement a $1 a gallon credit for RNG when used as a motor fuel. We currently have what's called an alternative fuel tax credit. It's 50 cents a gallon. We've had that for years now, and we've continued as an organization to fight for it and extended it and extend it. The idea is the same, right? So if that molecule dispensed is from renewable, you would be able to take $1 credit. If it is dispensed as from conventional, you would continue to take the 50-cent credit. So that also helps. It lays on, right? Jared was talking about the certainty. We don't have this huge fluctuations in costs like diesel does every year. We traditionally, if you look at federal data, natural gas tends to be about $1.50 lower retail than diesel. It's not always an apples to apples comparison, but when you overlay that credit on, there is that incentive. What it does, and the idea is for fleets or where it's dispensed to take advantage of that credit to help offset some of those early incremental costs in the equipment and make that ROI come in much sooner than 24 months.
The only request, I think, is to have the credit approved in the future.
Right.
Not retroactive.
That's the problem. Yeah.
So then fleets know it's there and
Exactly.
can pass that savings on to shippers.
I've got some more questions, but we've got a few minutes. I wanted to open up to the room if you have any questions from the audience here. No? Anybody? Okay, so then speaking of the tax credits and kind of the incentives, are there anything else? Is there anything else out there in the space that we should be thinking about that might be available or that we're advocating for beyond the RNG tax credit?
There's a production tax credit that was passed as part of the IRA, just as our 50-cent credit was extended. That is set to start in January. We don't have true IRS guidance what that looks like, and I think that's another reason why we've got to extend some of these other credits that happen at where the fuel is dispensed, right? But there is that production tax credit that I know we've been working on with ABC and some other organizations to try and get that guidance. Right now, the way it was written, we worked with Senator Wyden and his staff on development of that concept. It does support RNG. It uses the GREET model. We're hopeful that it will give it will give RNG its carbon intensity due, but we have not seen those guidance. We haven't seen that guidance just yet, and it's supposed to start in January. So that's a big question mark for a lot of folks.
So we're almost at time. So the general consensus is that this table here and this the group of panelists is very bullish on the outlook for RNG as well as natural gas transportation. Is there any final thoughts or comments, and we'll start with Jared, on why that's the case? I mean, you said a lot of it here today, but any final thoughts you would leave for what we might need to do to kind of continue to thread the needle to bring that collaboration all the way through from start to finish that this room can help with, or this coalition can do?
Yeah, I think if I could leave you with one thing as to what you could do, I think many of you don't control your transportation budgets, and I don't know the size of it, but you could ask those that work in your organization what your companies are doing to choose carriers that use alternative fuels, preferably renewable natural gas. We do have a brokerage service where we can select other carriers that use natural gas. So we've got a database of third-party carriers and we know of over 50 of them that use natural gas-powered trucks. So we can do it on a transactional basis as well, because there is a lot of infrastructure available. And the other thing would be, the problem is shippers tend to award freight less than a year or even for 6 months, and you can't count on it. So you want to be able to deploy the assets where you know you're going to use them. But I think that's about it.
Yeah, one of the things that we struggle with at Cummins is in our sales organization, we don't know the shippers. We know the carriers very well, So if whatever advocacy or education could be done or spread the word about what we can do and bring us in, we'd be happy to have conversations with shippers about, and when we do, they're very successful. They get it. And all of a sudden it's like changing their paradigm inside their own organizations about, we see a lot of opportunities with car OEMs because they have such big sustainability goals. And then they realize what we can do for them. And we move the ball down the field, so to speak. So education and advocacy across the broader ecosystem of transportation would be helpful for us.
I would say, groups like ours, we have a lot of material, a lot of staff expertise. Same thing as Patrick mentioned. If you're looking for someone to help explain or sell the story, we're available to help you do that. But I'd also say too, there's a lot of advocacy you can do on your own. Make sure your local legislators understand what you're doing, that this is taking, a waste liability and turning it into a green energy asset. It should be done anyway, right? We should be capturing this methane, above ground methane, naturally occurring, however you want to phrase it. But we should be capturing that. Tell that story and repurposing it. I mean, the fact that a trash truck is run on the very product that it picks up, I mean, that is the circular economy. And there's no other motor fuel that can claim that storyline. We need you to help explain that to legislators. And I think there's still a lot more education because in some quadrants, methane is a 4-letter word, and it shouldn't be.
I would echo what Dan said. So just a couple of points. Number one is advocacy. And I think that legislators hear a lot of voices, but they don't hear one voice. And I think that's a problem. Because it's evident from the stuff, NGVA TTP has a hill event, as we call it. And it was evident to me as being a complete neophyte, being on the hill, that they don't understand. They need to be educated, and if they were educated, they would act in a different manner. So I think that advocacy is a big thing. Subsidies, we already talked about that. And the last thing I would leave for fleets is come on in, the water's fine.
Okay, well, we're at time. I mean, I'm pretty encouraged myself hearing the conversation today. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity, but it means there's a tremendous amount that we have to do to work together. So I think it's if we could give our panelists a round of applause and thank them for us. If there's any final questions you want to come up, feel free to do so.